Hey guys, Jake here with a small note before you start the episode. You're about to listen to part 1 of a 2-part Fantastic Four discussion. Dave and I had way more to say than we thought we would about those Fantastic Four movies, so we broke it up into 2 easy to digest episodes. So with that out the way, enjoy the episode. Welcome to Capes, Cows and Masks, the show where we uncover the world of soups and science fiction. I'm Jake Hart, and I'm joined by
David Osgood.
And on this discussion episode, we're going to be looking back at the Fantastic Four movies. It's been 15 years since the first one came out, so this should be an interesting talk to look back at what went wrong, and oh boy, there was a lot that went wrong. And now that the rights are back at Marvel Studios, what could the future of the Fantastic Four possibly be? But before we get into that, Dave, how you doing, man? Are you as excited as I am to talk about Fantastic Four?
Oh, yes. It's going to be an interesting discussion, definitely, especially after, we've given so much love to different franchises over the past few episodes. But yeah, this should be an interesting one, most definitely. It's one that's got like a lot of nostalgia, but a lot of troubles. I think we'll talk about as well. And before we continue, I just want to say, obviously, the day we're recording this, David Prowse has sadly been announced as passing away. So I just wanted to give our condolences to his family and just what a sad loss that is for the community of sci-fi lovers such as ourselves. Obviously, he made a massive impact to Star Wars. And was half the reason that Darth Vader is so iconic. So a really great guy, and I was really sad to see the loss of him today. And that's another thing we've been enjoying lately, isn't it? Is Star Wars through the Mandalorian, etc. So yeah, quite a very sad loss.
Yeah. Condolences to his family and everyone close to him, because it's a big loss, Although he did live a long and wonderful life.
Yeah, definitely.
And not that he's from not that far away from here.
No, that's the good thing. I think when The Force Awakens come out, I think he actually went to the Cardiff Odeon for the premiere. Likely because I think Lucasfilm had banned him from any Star Wars official affiliated events. But
he said some things.
Yes,
I when I think of David Prowse as well, I always think back of an interview he did in 1979. This was before Empire Strikes Back came out, and yeah, he's like, oh yeah, I think I'm like Luke Skywalker's father or something like that. Like, it's just spoiled the climax of the film. And I always think of that, and he goes, oh yeah, I think I'm his dad or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's not on like James Earl Jones level of respect, but again, you just gotta respect the contribution he gave, isn't it? And where would we be if we didn't see those Bristolian eyes in the visor of Darth Vader at the end of New Hope?
Yeah. I mean, staying on sort of the Disney family with Star Wars, if anyone's got Disney Plus, there's a couple of things I want people to check out. Firstly is, I've been talking to you, Dave, I've been watching the new Marvel 616 show, which is, it's a fantastic piece of Marvel content. I would argue, it's up there with The Mandalorian and with like some of the best Disney Plus original content they've done. It's so good. It's an anthology series, so each episode focuses on a different area of Marvel and like follows maybe like a person or a group of people as they go through the process. And you learn so much about people's love for Marvel or inspires them, what motivates them to do different things. You know, we go into obviously the actual comics themselves, people cosplaying, fans of action figures, and it's just wonderful. It's so wonderful. And there's a couple of moments that teared me up, and I'm watching this, I'm like, man, this is why I love comics. And so I highly recommend anyone to check that out, because it's just so good. And if you want to keep getting more teary-eyed once you're done with that, go on to Disney Plus and watch Black Panther. And you will notice with the Marvel opening fanfare that they've actually changed it to be all Chadwick Boseman in tribute of our King T'Challa. So I thought that was a incredibly nice touch from Disney to do that on Black Panther.
Yeah, it's ironic because our friend Niall, I was discussing before recording the Mandalorians, we were talking about how Disney or streaming services can easily change content to take it out, because we were talking about the Jeans guy. You know, yeah. But obviously this is a good example of, you know, where you're, you know, because Niall was saying that, you know, he didn't like it because he was like, just embrace the, you know, the mistake kind of thing. But yeah, this is an example of having something which you can put something great onto and edit it in that way rather than sort of taking out a mistake, etc. So yeah, I'm almost like envious now that my Black Panther 4K Blu-ray doesn't have like that tribute at the beginning.
Yeah, it's a lovely touch.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, let's stay in Marvel. Let's go into why we're here today, Dave. For, you know, it's the 15-year anniversary of the 2005 Fantastic Four film, and it's also been the 5-year anniversary of the latest Fantastic Four film, or as most people refer to it as, Fan-4-Stick.
It's the only way you can refer to that film. That's the way they want you to know it. That's how they advertise it. I'm like, if that's what you want me to call it, that's what I'm going to call it.
That's what we're going to... Fan-4-Stick. And we're going to get into that in a bit. Plenty to discuss. But yeah, so in my opinion, and I'm sure for most people, comic fans, movie fans alike, there has yet to be a good, proper Fantastic Four movie that does the team justice, you know? The Fantastic Four are Marvel. They are considered Marvel's first family. They are the core of what launched Marvel as we know it today. Before Spider-Man, before Doctor Strange and the X-Men and the Avengers, before all of those characters, there was Fantastic Four. And they've become a staple of Marvel Comics, debuting in 1961. For people who don't know, we got a core lineup of 4 characters. Characters come and go, but these tend to be the 4 core, and that is Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman, her brother Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, and Ben Grimm, also known as The Thing. They are a family first and heroes second, and I think this is an approach that makes them stand out in the crowd amongst all the other superheroes in the Marvel Universe. So, Dave, what's your relationship and history with the Fantastic Four? Before we get into the films themselves, what do you think of like the IP, the brand, the team, the characters? What's your history with them?
Like, I don't have a massive history with them in terms of like comic books or, you know, reading about them specifically. So even though, you know, I don't have a great history with a lot of characters that way, I've still checked out like old issues of Spider-Man or X-Men, etc. Whereas, you know, the Fantastic Four never, you know, quite grabbed me. But, you know, there was that period in our lives in which obviously everyone was getting an animated show and they would cross over. So I remember the Fantastic Four appearing in the Spider-Man animated series. They had their own animated series. And yeah, you would sort of like experience all of these characters. I remember, you know, Doctor Doom has always been a big character, whether that be in the Fantastic Four or in other properties as well. So, you know, you would get like your Marvel versus Capcom games on like the PlayStation 1, and you'd have like, you know, Doctor Doom would be one of the, you know, the awesome characters to play on that. And yeah, you know, it's just the aspect of them being a part of the Marvel universe. You know, they've always been there as Marvel's first family, like you said, and you can feel that relationship to Stan Lee. You know, if you just look at any basic history of Stan Lee, you know, the Fantastic Four are always there as one of his early creations. So I think that you always feel a connection to the Fantastic Four as a fan of comic books or Marvel, no matter your experience with their comics or their TV shows or their movies, just because, you know, it's kind of like any sort of like legacy character. You know, you can appreciate the history there. It's like Superman or Batman. You know that there's a history in those characters, and they're some of the early superheroes that we got. So, you know, I've always appreciated them and respected them from that standpoint, and I've had my idea about who they are as characters. But like you said, it's just unfortunately, I don't think any of the films have ever captured that. And I don't even think it's a case of they've never, you know, got the story elements quite right, or they've never got like the characters quite right, or the look. You know, there's other properties in which they've like messed up the look of the characters or the powers or something like that. Don't get me wrong, they mess all that up as well. But, you know, they never seem to have got the actual core appeal of the Fantastic Four. You know, say what you will, again, like I really don't like the Mark Webb Amazing Spider-Man movies, but, you know, he still understood what was special about Peter Parker and about Spider-Man and his relationship with other characters. But with the Fantastic Four films, nobody seems to have ever understood what makes these characters unique and what their stories are all about. They just get so muddled up in like the military and just like the celebrity of their powers and like the weirdness of their powers. It's very bizarre, and like I said, you know, something we'll go into as we talk about the films. But yeah, I think it's really unfortunate, and I think going forward, as we'll also discuss, I think that's where it's important that you take that aspect of Marvel's first family. I think that needs to be core to the story, and I'll go into that about how I think they should reboot them and what I think the story should be. But I think that's what they need to do. Because to me, they are the original 60s, you know, superhero team, the first superhero team, if you will. And, you know, their powers are really fun. I think it's unfortunate that we haven't seen any great action sequences with them. Again, you got, you know, tidbits of it in some of the films. But I remember playing Marvel Ultimate Alliance, the, you know, so PlayStation game, and, you know, some of those characters were like the most fun to play with because, you know, you're in like a team of four, and they were really creative in the way that they used them, especially like Sue Storm, Johnny, you know, Mr. Fantastic. They had some really like creative ways in which they could use their powers. So yeah, they definitely haven't been served justice so far. And also shout out to the unsung member of the Fantastic Four. He is obviously the best Fantastic Four member who doesn't get enough credit, and I want to see him in the MCU, and that is Herbie the Robot, from one of the early Fantastic Four cartoons, in which the Human Torch was off doing his own thing with Spider-Man, etc. But we don't need the Human Torch. We got Herbie the Robot. You know, you got the Thing, Mr. Fantastic, Invisible Woman, and Herbie the Robot. What better team do you need than that, than this cute little robot as the fourth member of the Fantastic Four? So, you know, bring on Herbie the Robot as well. That's why these films fail. They never had Herbie the Robot. If they had Herbie the Robot,
they didn't embrace Herbie.
If they brought him in, the films would have succeeded.
I think that should be your pitch to Marvel. Like, just gotta bring Herbie back. That's the only way.
If there's nothing else you do today after listening to this podcast, go watch just the intro. I just love it. It's just the way that it goes, like the Fantastic Four, Mr. Fantastic, the Invisible Woman, and Herbie the Robot. And like, it is like so strange.
It's so weird, yeah. I mean, yeah, my history of Fantastic Four is maybe a bit deeper than yours. It's funny because most people, when they think of Marvel, they do think of like Spider-Man and Hulk. I would probably say those are like and Captain America. Those are probably like the faces of Marvel in a way. But when I was growing up, I was actually more into the weirder stuff of Marvel, which is why the sort of first Marvel comics I read were X-Men, Doctor Strange, and Fantastic Four. And, you know, they're all sort of weird comics in a way, with weird characters and weird powers. And And also, like, a lot of the villains, well, not necessarily villains, but a lot of the antagonists the Fantastic Four fought each week were monsters in one way or another, like some form of a mutation or monsters, and they were monsters in a way. So for me, as a kid, I always loved the fact that it was like monsters fighting monsters in a way, because grew up on monsters as well, being a big fan of like Godzilla and things like that. So that always attracted to me. And the fact that they were, a family first, that I always found that great, because for most superheroes, it's this solitary thing. It's like, I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders. Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. All this stuff that they feel that they have to do on their own. And then these guys here, where it's a dysfunctional family. Don't get me wrong, but it's still a family, and it's something you didn't see in any of the other comics that Marvel were producing. So that's what really attracted me to them. I did sort of phase out of them as I grew up. I started reading maybe a bit more edgier stuff. But then when we had the Fantastic Four movies, I was so excited, because that was the sort of era that we were, we couldn't believe the era we were in as comic book fans. Wow, we're getting Spider-Man films, we're getting X-Men films. And not only that, they're good. These films are pretty good. Like, you would have to hope that there would be a good superhero movie. And, sometimes mediocre would be good enough for comic book fans. Since we had Spider-Man and the X-Men movies, we set a bar. And then these films came along, and it was like, oh, wow, okay, there's just no respect for the characters at all. It feels like it was made for the sake of riding on this hype train, the trend of making these superhero films. So yeah, it just failed on all cylinders for me in that case. And then you will get into like the Josh Trank reboot, but that just failed again even more in a completely different direction. So it's a big shame, because I think that Fantastic Four are Marvel's first family. There's something so unique about them, something so iconic about them, with, skill sets and powers that I don't think we've really properly utilized in the movies. And I believe they could be something incredibly special to the MCU. And it's a team that people should love more. And if it was, I think, a lot of the love for Fantastic Four has diminished because of the poor reception of these films. They were Marvel's crowning jewel at one point. So it says something that Fox, when they produced these films, they just didn't respect the character at all and tarnished the brand for a long, long time. And, even now, if Marvel were to redo the Fantastic Four, and of course we know they will at some point, there's still, from some people, going to be that hesitation of like, oh, well, the last few were pretty awful, so like, how are you going to redeem this? And like we said, we'll talk about our thoughts there. So, yeah, I love the Fantastic Four. I don't think they get enough credit, and like I said, the films just ruin the brand for them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, like you said, that era which they came from in terms of the film, the Tim Story films, it was that aspect of like, oh, well, this Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi film's doing really well. Everyone just wanted to copy that. And, in doing so, they kind of all messed it up, because they kind of missed the point and sort of focused on like the wrong aspects, especially the aspects that maybe they weren't as accomplished to do as directors and writers, etc. And also, simply just messed up because maybe they were too lazy about it. So yeah, I think that their execution has a lot to do with the fact that it was also Fox, because I think as much as we have nostalgia and like appreciate and love a lot of the X-Men films, those aren't really faithful at all either. And I think that they took a lot of aspects from that over to this franchise as well, which is strange because, like I said, in some ways, Spider-Man, they still went with the costume and stuff. It was still quite a faithful adaptation. So, and the Fantastic Four is probably, discounting things like Galactus and big, ridiculous aliens, like you said. The actual team itself, you can do that pretty, like, realistically without getting too bizarre. Because it's not like the X-Men again, where you got like these goofy, yellow spandex and that kind of stuff. So, But I think it was that aspect of just thinking that like, oh, we can reinvent these characters and we can change them up for a new generation like we have with the X-Men. And again, it just didn't work here. I think that they got lucky with X-Men because they still had some of the core themes and they sort of made it their own. But this was just a hodgepodge of sort of trying to do the Sam Raimi thing and trying to do the Bryan Singer X-Men thing, and it just didn't work.
You are Trouble.
Trouble is my middle name.
Oh, you're hot.
Why, thank you, so are you. And I'm not afraid to cry.
Yeah, let's get into that. Let's get into the first two outings by Fox. Disclaimer, I will say yes, there is a fourth Fantastic Four movie out there for people to check out if they want. That was in 1994. Under Fox ownership, they produced this weird movie that never saw the light of day, and it was only made so Fox could keep the IP of Fantastic Four under their ownership. So if you're interested in some weird 90s really cheaply made Fantastic Four movie, I'm sure you can find it out there somewhere. But the first outing, first official adaptation came in 2005, which was directed by Tim Story, and the cast as followed is, we had Ioan Gruffudd as Reed Richards, Jessica Alba as Sue Storm, Chris Evans as Johnny Storm, Michael Chiklis as Ben Grimm, and Julian McMahon as Victor Von Doom. So this film was made on a budget of $100 million, and it brought in $333.5 million at the global box office. Not a disaster, not a huge success, I'd say either, but regardless, in Fox's eyes, they said that's good enough to make a sequel. So they went ahead and made the sequel, Rise of the Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer being voiced by Lawrence Fishburne, with the cast returning. And then we also have the big dust cloud Galactus ready to consume Earth. So, Dave, what are your overall thoughts on these films, these pair of films? As we just said, the mid-90s going into the late 90s, where they just didn't seem to get a lot right in this. But what are your overall thoughts?
Well, I will clarify the name of the Mr. Fantastic actor, just in case any Welsh listeners are offended, is Ioan Gruffudd.
Ioan, okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's my bad. That's my bad.
It's all good. Like I said, they've got nostalgia for me because, I grew up with them. I didn't actually see this one in the cinemas, the first one, because I think it just, again, it was just one of those things that you sort of wanted to see, never got a chance, but then I checked it out on DVD, and it was at a time where, me and my family was sort of like, oh, there's this newest film, and, I was starting to collect DVDs and that kind of stuff, and, we got together and watched it at night and that kind of stuff, and, so it's got some nice memories there, and I remember everyone I showed it to was actually like, oh, yeah, that was, it was quite enjoyable, or, I was quite surprised by that. But I think, that kind of speaks for itself in that, it doesn't take any major risks. It is just a sort of like by the book sort of superhero origin for the 2000s kind of thing. It's very uninteresting in the way that, it doesn't have any massive, it's not hugely cinematic. It doesn't, even just like the way, even when I was young, the way the film opens is just bizarre. It just opens just on like Reed and Ben just stood there in front of a building like, oh, Victor Von Doom's made a statue of himself. Like,
let's not forget that there's a giant V there.
Yeah.
And every time we see Victor, there's just V's everywhere.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for, self-branding and, in a dedicated, interior design, but yeah. But, yeah, it's just how uncinematic it was. Even, like I said, when I was younger, they stood out to me. They're like, oh, that was kind of just a weird way to open this film. Like I said, you think of something like Spider-Man and you got like that big opening with all the credits, and then, here's a story about a kid, it's him getting on the school bus, all that kind of stuff. And again, that's why I was thinking rewatching this is like, wow, this film really does want to be the Spider-Man film, because they even have the same scenes. They have Victor Von Doom sat there in an office, and I was like, just say the line. Just say, like, do you know how much I sacrificed to build this company? Like, he may as well have just said, you know, the Willem Dafoe dialogue, because the lines in that scene were, you know, it was just a play-by-play moment of just like, oh, you know, the stocks are going out, Vic, you failed. And that was just bizarre. And yeah, obviously the casting was always troublesome. Like I said, as a Welsh person, you know, you did appreciate that Johan Griffith got into this massive Hollywood production. It's just, again, Jessica Alba, you know, what's going on there. And, you know, I don't think the other cast members are particularly, like, wrongly cast or anything like that. I think majorly then it's down to, like, writing and the direction of the film. But it's also really disappointing, but by the end of the film, that you're just like, so what was that about? It was just about them getting their powers in space, and then Victor is just pissed that happened and wants to get revenge on Reed. And those kind of stories, I don't know why Hollywood thinks that works, because it just doesn't. Because everyone's like, they're clapping at the end and cheering. I'm like, why? You didn't save them from anything. All he was doing was trying to fight you. The Sonic the Hedgehog movie came out this year, had the exact same problem, in which, like, villains just have a sole purpose of just being after the one character, which just means you have no stakes or no save the world aspect to your superhero film, which is bizarre. And then makes it so when you go into the Rise of the Silver Surfer, they're just like, oh, the NYPD are trying to charge us for 3 cop cars that we wrecked during this skirmish the other day. And I'm like, well, what was happening in this? Because from the first film and the beginning of this film, I don't get the sense that you're crime fighters. That's never been established. Because that second film, you know, it's almost like, are you celebrities? Are you crime fighters? Are you scientists? Are you save the world type people? We don't know, because these films never tell us. So, you know, they're very problematic, and they don't really have a direction or, you know, a set decision for the characters. The only thing that they do is just that they do nod to the fact that Johnny is a daredevil and a playboy and, you know, is very reckless. You know, they have the, you know, Ben is kind of more like grounded and quite a sort of down-to-earth guy. You know, Reed is smart. That's just his personality, is that he's smart. Sue is Sue. I don't know what to say. She gets naked. Is that, you know, a character trait apparently, you know, in both these films?
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, so there's some very bizarre decisions in these films. And also, I just, when I said about that office scene with Victor, also, what the hell is with Ben's fiance? What kind of realistic person is this?
Oh my God.
What character, like, is just there, like, you know what? I've loved you for 10 years or however long it is, but I can't get over this. And I'm not even willing to speak to you about it. It's like, you could be angry at characters, but then there's just being angry that they don't even make any sense. You know, it's like, if she was even just his girlfriend that they'd gone out for a few years, I would have understood. But, like, you cannot legitimately buy that his fiance, who, like, is really excited that he's home and is, you know, saying, oh, you know, what's wrong, baby, and all this, would then just show up and, like, dump the ring on, like, the bridge and not even talk to him. I'm like, wow, that is another level of, like, you know.
God, I hated that moment. I hated that moment so much. I was just like, you're a dick.
Yeah.
Like, why on earth would you do that? Like, God, yeah, I have to echo everything you've said. This film has just so many problems with this film. I think for me, the biggest problem with these films is that they didn't try to make a Fantastic Four film. They tried to make a noughties movie with the Fantastic Four characters in it. You know, it just had too many tropes of the noughties in regards to that. Now, to a certain extent, I agree with you. They had the characteristics for these characters to a point. Like, yeah, Reed's the brainiac. Johnny is a literal hothead. Sue wants a normal life, and Ben is the comic relief. You know, to a certain extent, they got that right, because that's how sort of those characters are in the comics. But it didn't feel like they were those characters. It felt like they were caricatures of those characters. It was way too cartoony, and it relied too heavily on, like, in jokes and all these, like I said, tropes of the the noughties. And I think all of this just came at the expense of telling a true Fantastic Four story. It just got caught up too much in the celebrity of it, that sort of, again, noughties style, paparazzi everywhere. It's bling bling. And I'm just like, I don't vibe with this. This is not, yes, to a certain extent, the Fantastic Four. They've never hidden their identities. So they are celebrity superheroes. People know who they are. But these films, they just took it to a whole new level. It just felt like I was watching an MTV movie or something.
Yeah, I actually thought MTV because I just quickly, ironically, in the second film, they have E! News comes up like, oh, what's Sue Storm wearing? And I actually thought at that moment, this is what these films are. They are the E! News of the, Fantastic Four. It's if E! News made a Fantastic Four film.
And to top it off even worse, like there's this scene where Johnny is snowboarding, and with the music going, it's like this pop punk music of the noughties. I'm just like, am I watching a commercial for a snowboarding like festival or something like that? Because it literally just felt like I was watching that. And I was like, what has this got to do with what we're watching?
You can't imagine them like going down the slope of the seaboard and then just being like, winter wear from, active wear is, like the best way to like relax on the slopes.
The thing is, that is just so studio mentality when I watch that scene, because I'm watching that and I'm imagining them in the studio cutting the film, then going, yeah, the kids are going to love this because this is rad. Everybody, like the kids love snowboards and snowboarding. And I'm just like, what is going on here? This just feels like it's too celebrity. It's too commercialized. And like I said, it's too cartoony. It's just too much. It's too much, these films for me. In the goofy comic sense, and I'm just like, I can't do it, man.
Yeah.
I struggle with these. Like, we'll talk about Fantastic in a bit, but I will give this over the edge of that one, is that there is a little bit of charm in these films. There is something there, and I think you probably relate it back to the nostalgia and where it came from. But yeah, everything else is just, it's a disaster. What's going on? And then with Sue, again, it goes back to like this paparazzi celebrity lifestyle. Jessica Alba being a huge actor in the noughties, just too much over-sexualization of her. And there was times where it made me cringe. I was like, oh man, is this really necessary? Like, I can get behind the first scene where she's maybe first testing out her powers, but then they kept on doing it. And I thought, oh, let's not go here. And then even when it wasn't about her powers, they always had her to have her in these really tight tops with her, accentuating her breast too much. And I'm just like, this is uncomfortable. And I'm like, but I guess this was what the noughties was like.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think that goes into, what our thoughts would be of how it should go forward and what we would want to see the Fantastic Four. Is that, again, even as a kid, I never saw them as, you can say, oh, we want to tell like the young Fantastic Four story. If you want to go down that road, okay. But to me, the Fantastic Four are, Reed has, gray in sideburns for a reason. Because to me, I always envisioned them as like, you got Sue and Reed are like the parents, the mum and dad, like as in they are actually 40, 50 years old. And then you got Johnny, who's more the kid, and Ben, who sort of, could either be in the middle or, close to Reed and Sue's age.
But the Ben and Johnny sort of together have always been considered like the kids because they're always, in constant, making fun of each other and stuff.
Exactly, yeah. So that's why, again, the Jessica Alba stuff never worked, because you're just like, this is meant to be quite a sort of like respected, even if they'd gone with the sort of more housewife aspects of it, which, don't get me wrong, in this day and age would be like really cliched and wrong way to approach a female character, but at least that would seem at least somewhat respectable. And like I said, I don't think some aspects of the film, I don't even think some of it is nostalgia. I think, like you said, some of it is just the charm of those type of films of that time. And I think this is a case for all of the films. I think that all of them, I think there's a good film buried in all of them, and there's like potential in every single one of them. I don't think that any of them I'm not saying that any of them could have been edited into a good film. It's just that sometimes you see certain lines or certain story points and you're like, why weren't you there at like the first stage of scripting going, you know what, let's move that over here and let's do this, Reeves, move that. And I hate it when, like, especially you get like great lines and then they just ruin it with something else. And I think Fantastic Four is a good example of that, because I think this does genuinely have some good comedy in it at times, even though, that scene you mentioned with the snowboarding is really stupid and cliche. I do really like the line where she's like, "You're on fire," and he's like, "Thanks, you're pretty good too." I'm like, that is a good joke.
I will say that the best parts of this movie came from Chris Evans as Johnny Storm. His comedic timing is on point in this film.
Yeah.
I just felt like there was too much comedic going on.
Yeah. But even I think Michael, this might be, sacrilege, but I don't actually think Michael Chiklis as the Thing is that bad, actually. I think, obviously, he is very much a comedy actor. He's kind of that SNL sort of, pool of American actors. And I don't think, again, he could work in like a serious like MCU film or anything like that. But he never came across as too, like there is like the parts like where he puts the shaving foam in his face. He's like, "Johnny," and all that kind of stuff. But again, if you're going with that sort of like campy, silly, family hijinks, you can get away with it. But I do like as well the scene where like that guy is on the bridge and he's just like, "You think you got problems, bud? Like take a look." And I'm like, that is like really true. Like that is a great moment. But then it's just the fact that the film then wants to like ruin all of that by then being like, "Oh, let's have like a bird poo on him. Wouldn't that be fun?" And like it's like, "Oh, and let's have like the dog in the fire truck, like like put his paw over his eyes. Oh, wouldn't that be cute and fun?" It's just they always ruin those moments. There's some good jokes, but they're followed up by crap jokes.
On the character of the Thing in this one, in the first one, he's hated Victor Von Doom this entire film. There's been no sense of redemption at him. But then at the end, he's like, "Oh, I'll help you. Just get in the machine." and he's like, and then he's like, "Yeah, Reed's an asshole. I should be your friend." Like, this, there was no point in the film. Like, I would have got behind it if, like, throughout the film, Victor was, like, planting seeds. But it's all of a sudden, it just comes out, "Yeah, Reed's an asshole. I'm going to go with you. Put me in the machine." Like, it just felt so half-baked. Do you know what I mean? And then, okay, let's talk about Doom then. Because, man, right, I will say this up top, that I love the Fantastic Four. But above the Fantastic Four, I love Doctor Doom. I think he is my favorite villain in the whole Marvel universe. He's so complex, you know what I mean? And this guy has literally gone toe-to-toe with the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, the X-Men. He's like, I would say he's Thanos level, in a sense. And what makes him more scary is that he's not this giant purple alien with a gauntlet of stones. He's just a dude with his superior intellect and his technology. Mm-hmm. But here, they just made him this... this zany, over-the-top villain with his powers. First of all, he shouldn't have powers. It ruins the complexity of Doctor Doom, and what makes him so compelling is that he can go toe-to-toe with all these super-powered people, and he doesn't have those powers. It's just because of his intellect and his technology that he can do it. Sort of like Iron Man in a way. But they just gave him powers, and I never understood his goofy powers, the electricity and stuff like that. I didn't understand. And then his motives, like, there was a bit of adversary between him and Reed, but not enough for the end of the film to go, "Well, I hate you all. I'm gonna like destroy you all." It ruined it for me. And at least compared to what we get later with the Fantastic, Julian McMahon, he's trying to have some fun with the role. I can see he is trying, but he's just given this awful material to work with, and I just can't get behind it. It's just, and then to bring him back in the second film, I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, and it's not even different. It's the same motivations as the last film. He's like, "Oh, I want revenge," because So yeah, it just complete Doctor Doom above all else in this film is the biggest failure for me.
Yeah, and it's again, they're trying to copy the other films. It comes across very much as like, oh, you know, in Spider-Man, Green Goblin was developing his powers alongside Spider-Man. So, you know, we need to have Doctor Doom develop powers from the accident as well. And he needs to be like discovering his powers at the same time as the Fantastic Four. Which, like I said, doesn't work because you've got like these very elaborate powers. You know, the idea with Spider-Man and Green Goblin is that they're supposed to be like two sides of a coin, and they're supposed to be like very, you know, similar in some ways. But also they try and go for the Magneto approach as well, of being like, oh, you know, Magneto's always the villain in the end. Like, you know, Rise of, you know, the Silver Surfer, you know, he comes back and, you know, he betrays them, you know, just like Magneto did next to, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, that doesn't work because you're not telling like the same story, just telling, like you said, some guy who's just pissed at the Fantastic Four, but doesn't have any like other ulterior motives, which is just ridiculous. And I think you can tell immediately like how bad this character is and how cliche it is, that at the beginning of that Fantastic Four film, he proposes to Sue and even says, you can see it as a promotion if you want.
Oh,
I'm like,
God.
wow, what a douche.
And also, why the fuck is he proposing to her when they're not even going out?
Yeah.
Like Sue tells Reed, "Oh, we're not a thing. Like that's not happening."
Yeah.
And he's like, so out of nowhere, he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna marry you." But consider this a promotion.
Yeah, talk about hashtag me too. You know, he should be the face of that. Like, what an absolute dick. So, yeah, I always found that weird. I respected that they went for at least the look, and like I thought that the look of the character was somewhat faithful and seemed a decent adaptation. In the second film, it just turns bizarre. I don't know why they're like, oh yeah, and let's bring back like the look, but let's give him like this weird, I don't know, like tarpaulin piece of leather material he found on the floor as his cloak, which is a bit weird.
And give him a surfboard.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go for a spin. My favorite line of that film.
Oh no.
So yeah, Doom is very problematic, and like I said, you know, with every superhero film, you know, it's something that I always think is that, you know, behind every good hero there needs to be a good villain, and you know that they don't succeed in doing that, unfortunately. So
it is known by many names. My people called it Galactus, the devourer of worlds.
Yeah, so then we got the Rise of the Silver Surfer movie. Like I said, they earned enough at the box office to go, hey, let's make another one. So on the Rise of Silver Surfer, the budget was increased to $130 million, but it grossed less at the box office at $301.9 million. So they spent more and earned less. And if you ask me, it was even worse than the first one for me. You know, having rewatched these, I was just like, I think probably going into it, because the first one was poor, I had no connection to these characters. Going into the second one, I'm like, I don't care about these characters. But the second one was even worse because everything I hated about the first one, the celebrity aspect of it and all that, the MTV of it all, it was on steroids in the second one, you know? Like, again, to a certain degree, they did keep it to the comics because, you know, the Reed and Sue wedding in the comics is a big event. You know, the paparazzi were covering it. It was a huge thing, and then Galactus invades and disrupts the wedding, you know? Or Silver Surfer, I should say, before Galactus comes aboard. But then, like you said, why the hell is the news still focused on the wedding when there's an intergalactic threat going on? Like, and like throughout the whole film, it's just the news. Oh, what's she going to be wearing? Oh, when's the date going to be postponed to? Why are we talking about postponed date when the world could end? Like,
yeah,
it just ruined it for me.
The news report actually says, but more importantly, you know, the thing that everyone's talking about, and you're like, no, go back
more
to that.
More importantly than the end of the world.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, and then again, the characters, they just didn't do it for me. Again, too much over sexualization of Jessica Alba. They're like, oh yeah, let's turn it up again even more in this one. And yeah, as we mentioned, bringing back Doom and then Silver Surfer, it just felt a bit flat for me, Silver Surfer. And then obviously we get Galactus, who is a Thanos level type villain, you know, this huge sort of almost deity, you could say, that swallows whole planets. And then he's reduced to a giant dust ball. Like, it's just falls on so many levels. Like, I just felt it was much worse. Well, maybe not much worse, because the first one's pretty awful. But it was worse than the first one.
That idea that, with Galactus and everything, it seemed like it was an afterthought, because weirdly, one of the special effects supervisors said that, at the end of the film when Silver Surfer, spoiler, but, he goes into like Galactus and he sort of sacrifices himself and the energy from the board to destroy him. Originally, that didn't happen. They said they didn't shoot any of that because originally he was just going to fly off and Galactus was going to go chase him and that would be it, the day saved. And I was like, what? You weren't even going to show Silver Surfer defeating Galactus or show Galactus being destroyed. They were just going to have him just fly away after him. I would be like, that would be, and they were like, we realized that was like really, anticlimactic and we didn't get to see the end of this character's journey and it was great to see that conflict. I'm like, how would you look at a script like that and go like, hey guys, have you noticed we haven't actually shown the villain getting defeated in this film? Like, what a ridiculous thing to do. So that, I think, is bizarre. But like I said, the pros I will give this, I think, like you said, that this film loses a lot of the charm and what's good about the first one because, well, they carry on some of the, the dynamics between, Johnny and Ben and that kind of stuff. But like I said, unfortunately, it just gets all swamped under the fact that, they're trying to tell this bigger story and you've got Doom, Silver Surfer, the wedding, and like you said, you get a lot of these cliches, come into it. But I do think that Doug Jones was like a fantastic Silver Surfer. I really think that like the Silver Surfer is my favorite aspect of this film. I think mainly because he's not in it very much, actually. He doesn't have many lines of dialogue. He doesn't do very much. But that's actually why I think that out of it, I'm not going, oh, they ruined Silver Surfer or they did him bad. Because I actually think they do a really good job with Silver Surfer. It's just that he doesn't get enough script or story to actually do anything of merit. But I think Doug Jones, who's obviously used to playing these characters under a lot of prosthetics, he's known for doing all of this because the way that he like moves, he's, collaborates a lot with Guillermo del Toro because, he knows how to sort of move his body to like certain ways for like to give across character that way. And he does like the voice. I'm not sure if it is, I think it is Doug Jones does the voice as well. He sounds really epic, I think, he sounds really cool.
No, it's it's Lawrence Fishburne who does the voice.
Oh, is it? Oh, right, that makes sense. Yeah. Sometimes Doug Jones flips between doing voices and but yeah. So Lawrence Fishburne sounds amazing as that voice. And yeah, I think that Doug Jones does a fantastic, job with the physical performance. So I really enjoyed all of that. I thought that like they did a really good job with that. And if they were going forward, I'd love to see those two return again. Even if it wasn't for Silver Surfer, if it was, some other member of his race or his planet or something, as just a nod to that being the one aspect that worked. And like you said, the budget obviously went a lot towards Silver Surfer because his look, I think that he looks really cool, even when he's not like the reflective metal, even when he's in the sort of more physical suit. I think that still works really well. They have the cool eyes and the sort of face looks pretty good. But, unfortunately, it's just that. And the Stan Lee cameo, I think that's one of my favorite Stan Lee cameos as well. It's just the fact he tries to get into the wedding.
But I'm Stan Lee.
Yeah, he's like, sorry, yeah, right. So, like, those are the only two like credits I'll give this film is that I think they do, do a good job of Silver Surfer and they have a fun Stan Lee cameo. But apart from that, like I said, it's a problem with Fan Four Stick as well. Like, why do we have to get like, bogged down with all this military stuff? Like, again, you've got a superhero family who's supposed to be like defending the Earth, and they just become like lackeys of the military. Like, what's interesting about that? Like, it reminds me so much of the 2007 Michael Bay Transformers of like, oh, let's get the military involved. Let's have all these like, cool like, troops come in and help save the day and all this kind of stuff. Just like, why though? Why would this happen? And you don't get any progression in character and like I said earlier, you don't get an idea of whether they're crime fighters, whether they're scientists. Because say Civil War, for example, that film starts off with them doing that mission in Bolivia and you get an idea of like, oh, this is the type of team they are now. Scarlet Witch is like learning to become a member of the team and Falcon is now, integrated, blah, 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 blah. And that's what this film could have done with. They could have done with like an action sequence to tell you, right, here's who the Fantastic Four are now. But instead, they're just like, hey, the Fantastic Four have got a new tower. It's all modern and stuff. And you're like, okay, when did this happen? And then at one point, like Johnny goes outside and there's like a Fantastic Four shop, like at the bottom. It's like not even like they want to commit to that storyline.
Oh my God. And let's not forget Johnny's all the advertising on the suits.
Yeah.
Like,
It's just again, they were just like, hey, what would be a fun idea? What would be a fun joke? But then
that's probably all the sponsors they had for the movie.
Yeah, the power swapping as well. Why? It's just again as if they were like, oh, what would be fun? It would be a fun toy if we could have like the Johnny with all the powers toy, and like it just come across like as just a gimmick for that. It does make for somewhat like a fun action scene at the end, but before that, when Johnny sees the Silver Surfer flying away, and he's like, I'm gonna go after him, and Reed goes, Johnny, no, and he like flies into him. I'm like, why would that have happened in the first place? Even if he wasn't swapping powers, why would Johnny fly into Mr. Fantastic's like web of stretchiness? Like he would just fly around him. It was like such a like stupid, plot element they put in there for no reason.
Yeah, it's rough. Okay, so this is a pretty good place to stop the conversation. In part 2, Dave and I will dive into the 2015 movie Fan4Stick and the future of the Fantastic Four. Thanks for listening.